American in jail. A U.S. citizen and Princeton PhD candidate has been in an Iranian prison for 3 years. His wife tells us his story. Back in Washington, President Trump returns to the White House after visiting victims' families and first responders from 2 deadly mass shootings. Worldwide abuse scandal. More than 200 people are suing the Catholic Archdiocese in Guam. And do not forget, a Jesuit priest tells us about an initiative to help religious minorities in Iraq. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, August 8th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. It's been 3 years since an American graduate student was arrested and jailed in Iran. The Islamic Republic accuses him of being a spy, but the UN says there's no legal grounds for his detention. Today, his wife is speaking out and asking for help. Correspondent Jason Calvi reports.
Hua Chu hasn't seen her husband, Shiwei Wang, in 3 long years.
I'm quite worried, and I think he's facing increasing risk.
The Princeton grad student was doing research in Tehran in 2016 when he was charged with espionage. He's serving a 10-year sentence in this prison. For 2 years, he shared a cell with another man accused of spying for the U.S. He was freed in June.
He's suffering a lot. It's very difficult for him. He got skin disease, and it took many months to get a doctor for him. I really asked President Trump not to leave Zio behind.
Hua Chu says her husband finds comfort in reading books.
He's still a nerdy scholar. He asked me to mail books, thick scholarly books, and he's still learning languages.
Their 6-year-old son, Shofan, has spent half his life without his dad.
Our son really needs his father to come back to provide him guidance and to have that some parent affection, connection. We're really missing him.
According to the New Yorker, the Trump administration is working on his release, but Hua Chu says she knows nothing.
I pray that when my son blows out his birthday candles next year, my husband, Shiwei Wang, will be right there with us.
The couple speaks several times a week and talked with each other yesterday, the 3rd anniversary of Wang's arrest. Princeton University is also urging freedom. His academic advisor, Dr. Stephen Kotkin, calls Wang a formidable scholar and deeply humane person. He tells me everyone at Princeton misses Wang terribly. Wyatt?
Jason, any update on what the U.S. government is doing to secure his release?
Neither the State Department nor the White House are sharing any information. New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith says they're pressing for freedom, and staff from New Jersey Senator Rob Menendez say they're going through back channels to seek that freedom.
Okay, we hope they'll have some luck in doing so. Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. Mayors across the country are asking Congress to act after 2 mass shootings over the weekend left more than 30 dead in Ohio and Texas. Their plea comes as President Trump returns to the White House after visits to the grief-stricken communities. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Wyatt, finding bipartisan solutions to end gun violence won't be easy here in Washington, but those mayors are asking the Senate to return to the Capitol and pass gun safety laws.
Let's see if we can get something done. And Republicans want to do it and Democrats want to do it.
The president spoke yesterday after a day spent in Dayton and El Paso, 2 cities reeling from mass shootings that left 31 dead and dozens more injured.
We had an amazing day. There are a lot of heroes. A lot of people did just incredible work.
In El Paso, President Trump visited a hospital and talked with police officers at an emergency operations center.
We met with also the doctors, the nurses, the medical staff. They have done an incredible job, both places.
You know, he was there to comfort those injured and those victims, and he and the First Lady did a nice job of that.
The suspect in El Paso, who killed 22, was allegedly motivated by racism. Today, the U.S. bishops are calling for a change of language and rhetoric in America, writing, The anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, anti-Muslim, and anti-Semitic sentiments that have been publicly proclaimed in our society in recent years have incited hatred in our communities. Over 200 American mayors also sent a letter to the Senate urging them to vote on 2 House-passed bills that would expand background checks for gun sales, quote, to prevent people who should not have access to firearms from being able to purchase them. President Trump is privately calling up senators while publicly pushing for gun safety measures.
Well, I'm looking to do background checks. I think background checks are important.
On another topic, on his way back to Washington last night, President Trump told reporters he's strongly considering letting former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich out of prison. Blagojevich was jailed for trying to sell Barack Obama's old Senate seat, but President Trump doesn't think he deserved a 14-year prison sentence. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. U.S. officials conduct their largest immigration raids in at least a decade. ICE agents made 680 arrests. They raided roughly a half-dozen chicken processing plants in Mississippi. Most of those were arrested were Latino workers. The operation had been planned for months as part of a wider government investigation. It coincided with the president's visit to El Paso. More than 200 former altar boys, students, and Boy Scouts are suing Guam's Catholic Archdiocese. They claim they're the victims of sexual abuse, some at the hands of the former Archbishop. The island's new Catholic leader is promising transparency.
It's important for the Church of Guam to confront, in a good way, the evil that we found, and to acknowledge it and to own it. You can't repent for what you don't own.
35 clergy, teachers, and scoutmasters are accused of sexual assault. The Archdiocese filed for bankruptcy protection earlier this year. 4 out of 5 citizens in the U.S. territory are Catholic. And in New Jersey, a lawyer says he has discovered accusations of clergy abuse from 12 priests not originally named by church officials. The state earlier this year released a list of 180 clergy members accused of misconduct. The additional names come from all of the state's dioceses and the Archdiocese of Newark. The disputed territory of Kashmir is in its 4th day under a lockdown and communications blackout. Pakistan and India both claim the region. India's prime minister has downgraded Kashmir from a state to a territory. He says that will help end decades of terrorism. In response, Pakistan has suspended a key train service to New Delhi, but officials say they are not considering military action. A religious sister in India has been dismissed from her order for disobedience. Sister Lucy Kalapura is accused of protesting the handling of another nun's accusation a bishop repeatedly sexually abused her. That bishop was charged in April. Sister Lucy disputes the disobedience claims and says she will pursue legal action. This month marks the 5th anniversary of the Yazidi massacre in Iraq, when ISIS militants took control of the country's northwest territory and enslaved the ethnic minority group. Earlier this week, their community mourned while remembering the 5,000 Yazidi men who were killed 5 years ago. Most of Iraq's Yazidi population has been displaced and live in camps like this one. The war against ISIS has uprooted much of Iraq's population, and only some of them have returned to their homes. Father Thomas Smolich, International Director for the Jesuit Refugee Service, joins us from Rome. Father Tom, Jesuit Refugee Service has launched the Do Not Forget Us campaign for the Yazidis. Tell us about it.
Sure. Thank you, Wyatt, for this opportunity. As I'm sure many of your listeners know, it was 5 years ago this month that the ISIS group launched its campaign against the Yazidi community, who have been and continue to be one of the most marginalized groups in the whole country of Iraq. We are doing this campaign right now to remind people that the Yazidi community is still there. The Yazidi community has suffered greatly over these 5 years, and we're doing our best to, in a sense, bring some light to their situation, to their history, and to ask the world not to forget, to let them know that there are people out there who care about them, who care about their families and about their future.
Well, as you say, religious minorities like Yazidis and Christians in Iraq have suffered tremendously under ISIS. Those who can immigrate to the West usually do or have already. Why do you think it's important, though, for them, Christians and Yazidis, to stay in Iraq, to stay in the region?
So it is one of those complicated situations, Wyatt, of being a religious minority in a situation which is complicated with ethnic and religious issues. I think the primary issue here that we would see is one of protection or one of safety. Obviously, if people can be safe, if people can feel comfortable in their own homes, in their own neighborhoods, most people want to stay. As a matter of fact, as you commented, a number of Christians have left Iraq, but a large number continue to stay there. The Yazidi population shares some of the same situation as the Christian population, certainly as a minority and certainly as a group which suffered greatly during the ISIS campaigns. I think, though, there are two distinct differences. One is that there really is no Yazidi community beyond Iraq. And so they have been forgotten. They're not really well known. And they are not really, it's not a concern that many people have. I think the other thing worth noting is that, and some terrible things happened to the Christian communities there. But overall, the situation with the Yazidis was and is far worse. The UN officially declared the situation with them a genocide in 2016. The number of women sold into sexual slavery continues to be a stunning number. 3,000 people are still missing, most of them women, most of them, again, caught up in a whole situation of incredible slavery and depredation. It's never easy to be a religious minority in a war situation, but I think it's safe to say that while acknowledging that many Christians suffered greatly, the Yazidi community as a whole is bearing even a larger burden.
So important that we continue to shine the spotlight on the situation in Iraq. A Jesuit refugee service was founded in 1980 by Father Pedro Arupe, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus at the time. Now, he was inspired to respond to the plight of Vietnamese refugees fleeing their war-ravaged homeland. Now, JRS operates in 56 countries. Describe how all this work, Father Tom, has had an impact on you.
It's an amazing, that's a great question, and one that I reflect on from time to time. One of the greatest gifts of my job is being able to visit the places that we serve, to meet the refugees that we accompany, and also to meet the staff who are working closely with these folks. It has really opened my heart and my knowledge of what people go through to live with dignity, what people will do to have a sense of safety and hope for their children. I previously worked in a Mexican migrant community in Los Angeles many, many years ago, and so had some familiarity with the dynamics of Mexican and Central American refugees and migrants. But this has brought a whole other dimension of both pain and real suffering, but also great hope and great faith. So many people who have suffered so much continually say, and God is still with me. I know that God has not let me down. For me, it has been striking to experience the faith of people who have far less than I do, who have suffered far more than I have, and their ability to recognize God's presence in their lives. If they can do that, certainly I can do that as well.
We pray God will continue to bless the work that you do all around the world, and especially this campaign, specifically in Iraq. Father Thomas Smolich, International Director for the Jesuit Refugee Service. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Wyatt, and God bless.
Coming up, analysis of the trade war between the United States and China. Chinese imports of American goods plunged in July as a tariff war between the world's two largest economies intensifies. China and the United States have been locked in an ongoing dispute over trade and technology. Chinese exports to the United States were down as well. China has imposed its own punitive tariffs and suspended the purchase of American soybeans and other goods in retaliation. Joining me now is Tori Whiting, trade economist at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank. Tori, welcome. I want to start off by just playing a clip from the White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow from earlier this week. Let's take a listen.
We're in great shape economically, and frankly, the biggest loser is China right now.
Okay, so in your opinion, is he right? Is China really the biggest loser right now in all this?
Well, here's the thing. It's true that this trade war is affecting both the U.S. and the Chinese economy, but the real losers here are the American people and the Chinese people, because this trade war has led to the freedom of both of those individuals to trade with one another to diminish.
Are tariffs at all going to be effective, do you think, in negotiations with China?
Absolutely not. I don't believe so. If that were the case, we would have seen a change in the last year and a half or so in the status of the negotiations. All these tariffs are just taxes on the American people, making it more expensive for us to buy from abroad.
How have U.S. businesses been impacted so far?
This is such a great question, and I've talked to businesses all around the country about the impacts they're feeling. I mean, you're talking about, at this point with China, the tariffs have mostly been on intermediate goods, so they're things that we buy to make other things. So when the prices of those things go up, it makes it more expensive to produce manufactured goods here in the United States, which then leads to businesses having to make decisions. Do they increase prices for consumers? Do they decrease their capital investment? Maybe they don't hire as many people. Big questions in terms of the ability to use capital to improve and grow their business.
President Trump has said an additional 10% tariff on goods from China will take effect September 1st. How will the timing of that affect American consumers, especially as we're thinking about back-to-school shopping? Is that enough time for it to really feel an impact?
We'll see, but what we do know is that the remaining $300 billion or so that will be hit next, it's mostly on consumer goods. So everything from shoes to clothing to pacifiers and baby formula. So when you look at back to school, you're going to see a lot of things that could be impacted. And we'll see how quickly that affects prices. I know the 10% may be a little bit easier to minimize the price on consumers, but it seems pretty clear the president might end up going forward with the 25%, jacking that 10 up to 25, and that will absolutely have an immediate impact on consumers.
Well, if this continues, is this going to impact our upcoming holiday shopping season in December?
I wouldn't be surprised, and part of that is because one of the biggest set of items that is on this next list are Apple products and technology products. So televisions, cell phones, AirPods, all those sorts of things that are big Black Friday shopping gifts and also big holiday gifts.
As you know, the U.S. stock market has been pretty volatile watching all of this develop. Should we be concerned at all about a potential recession?
We'll see. I think that the last quarter, the 2.1% growth in the second quarter of this year was troubling. And I think that aside from great tax policy, great regulatory policy coming out of this administration, the trade policy is really detracting from the growth that we could be seeing. And we'll see what happens.
Okay, we'll be following all of it. Tori Whiting, trade economist at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks so much for your insight.
Thank you.
Up next, a new poll says more than 1 in 5 millennials are lonely. New research suggests millennials, men and women ages 23 to 38, are struggling with feelings of loneliness. A recent survey by polling and marketing research firm YouGov finds 30% of millennials always or often feel lonely, and 22% of millennials surveyed said they have no friends. Joining me now to take a closer look at all of this is Vince Coglianese, editorial director at the Daily Caller. Vince, welcome back. These findings are really disturbing. I mean, a little surprising considering that the age range of what we're talking about here. Millennials is always the ones who seem to be connected to someone through social media.
Yes.
What's going on?
Well, it makes you kind of think that those connections are very superficial compared to a world in which we once engaged each other on a person-to-person level in a very physical way. Civic engagement existed. There are a bunch of numbers here that I think are really important. On a week where we're talking about what are the causes of why somebody breaks, the mass shootings we came out of this weekend, what is that? And I have a working theory, and I think that that's a disease of despair, that there are a range of these in our society that nobody is talking about, but everyone should be, especially public policymakers here in Washington. Examples: suicide rates are at their highest level that they've been since World War II. That's huge. Life expectancy in the United States has dropped every year in the last 3 years. Why is that? Well, it turns out the opioid crisis plays a role in this. People are turning to drugs, addictive drugs. You have people turning to alcohol. And many of the people who are affected in this category are millennials who are dominated by the devices that they have and aren't engaged in society in the way people used to be. Very few are going to church even. You look at the numbers on church engagement, millennials and younger generations are the highest category of people who identify as no religious affiliation.
The nuns, N-O-N-E-S.
N-O-N-E-S, nuns. And what that means is, even if you believe in nothing, the very act of going to church is a form of community building. It was the type of thing where communities were able to have some civic engagement around that. People aren't seeing each other anymore. And now this loneliness, this should be a blaring siren to policymakers in our society that we've got real problems to confront.
What do you think are potential remedies for this? I mean, is it just people getting involved in church groups, or is it people involved in just regular once a month, some kind of group that need to be engaging with other people?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a role to play for civic groups. I mean, Rotary clubs, unions, churches, all of those once played a very foundational role to our society and the way we kind of modeled ourselves. I think one of the things that clearly needs to be done is that we should reconsider whether or not we have a reflexive feeling of positive reaction to social media. Starting in 2005, something like 5% of the public was even on social media platforms. But as these platforms have grown, this year, it's about 79% of people are on social media. And the trend lines during that period, all those negatives I talked about, that's when they grew. So we should start thinking clearly as a society that this isn't all positive, that there are some downsides to the superficial connectivity, and that humans need real connectivity. We need to really form organizations. You really need to know your neighbors. And the important first step is acknowledging that it's an issue.
It really does seem like a lot of people are addicted now to social media. It's become kind of its own thing, and obviously now we're seeing the repercussions of that.
We have neuroscientists that are hired by social media companies in order to establish how they can make you addicted to the products. They want to make sure that you spend as much time as you humanly can using those products. That's a huge deal. They're exploiting humanity's sort of psyche to be able to make that product profitable for themselves. Makes sense in the long run for them as a business model, but there are downsides for society. Is it all connected? I think there is some relationship.
Well, these issues are so important, and like I say, they often go uncovered by the mainstream media, so it's so important that we highlight these. Vince Coglianese, editorial director at the Daily Caller, thanks very much.
My pleasure, thank you.
Tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, Catherine Hadro speaks with Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton about the future of Roe versus Wade.
I've always been optimistic that if we get judges in these courts that respect the Constitution and what was actually meant by the Constitution, that we would overturn Roe v. Wade eventually.
Paxton also examines what would happen if the landmark 1973 Supreme Court ruling that affirmed the constitutional right to an abortion was overturned. You can see Catherine Hadro's interview tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern right here on EWTN. And with that, we conclude our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at EWTN News Nightly. For the entire team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.